Welcome to Still Science Lab. Tonight, we are going to descend deep underground into the cold, heavily shielded concrete tunnels of Geneva, Switzerland, to investigate a terrifying anomaly that has fundamentally broken our understanding of reality. We are going to look directly into the chilling discovery that CERN just found the dark sector, and we are going to explore exactly why the global establishment of physics is currently in a state of absolute, unprecedented panic. To truly comprehend the sheer magnitude of this scientific crisis, we must first examine the towering intellectual cathedral that has just been violently burned to the ground. For the last 50 years, human civilization has operated under the deeply comforting, yet ultimately arrogant delusion that we had finally deciphered the ultimate source code of the universe. We relied entirely on a single, mathematically perfect blueprint designed to explain every physical interaction, every fundamental force, and every single building block of matter in existence. This absolute framework is known as the Standard Model of Particle Physics, and it stands as the undisputed crowning achievement of human intellect. The Standard Model was not just a theory, it was a pristine, unyielding mathematical prophecy. It neatly categorized the entire chaotic cosmos into a beautiful, elegant table of 12 fundamental particles and 4 governing forces. It explained exactly how quarks bind together to form the protons in your blood, how electromagnetism allows your eyes to perceive the light of distant stars, and how the invisible Higgs field stretches across the void to give physical mass to the universe. For half a century, every time physicists tested this model, it passed with terrifying, flawless precision. It predicted the existence of particles decades before we possessed the technology to physically find them. It created an illusion of total, absolute control. We truly believed that we had mapped the boundaries of reality. We believed that the physical universe we could see, touch, and measure was all that there was, and that the Standard Model was the final, definitive rulebook for existence. Driven by this supreme confidence, humanity decided to build the ultimate monument to our own intelligence. We constructed the Large Hadron Collider, the most colossal, complex, and expensive machine ever engineered in the history of our species. Buried hundreds of feet beneath the borders of France and Switzerland, this 27-kilometer ring of superconducting electromagnets was designed for one specific, monumental purpose: to smash subatomic particles together at 99.9% the speed of light, recreating the unimaginably violent conditions that existed just fractions of a second after the Big Bang. The Large Hadron Collider was built to be the ultimate proving ground. It was constructed to finally verify the absolute perfection of the Standard Model, to tie up the final loose ends of physics, and to proudly declare that humanity had completely solved the mystery of the cosmos. But the universe, it seems, deeply despises human arrogance. Deep underground in Geneva, the machine that was built to definitively prove the blueprint of reality has just violently and irreparably shattered it. The data pouring out of the colossal detectors at CERN has stopped producing the expected, comforting results of the Standard Model. Instead, the mathematics have begun to glitch, producing terrifying, impossible anomalies that defy the most sacred, unbreakable laws of physical science. When physicists smash protons together at these apocalyptic speeds, they rely on the absolute, foundational law of the conservation of energy. What goes into the microscopic collision must mathematically equal exactly what comes out of it. The energy can change forms, transforming from velocity into mass or radiating outward as light, but the total mathematical ledger must always balance perfectly to zero. It is the most non-negotiable rule of our three-dimensional reality. However, In the most recent, highly classified runs at the Large Hadron Collider, the mathematical ledger has failed to balance. A staggering, terrifying amount of energy is violently vanishing upon collision. The detectors are registering a massive deficit, a sudden absence of momentum that simply cannot be accounted for by any known particle, force, or interaction within the standard model. The energy is not being destroyed, because the fundamental laws of thermodynamics dictate that energy cannot be deleted from existence. Instead, the data points to a reality-breaking conclusion. The energy is actively escaping. It is bleeding out of our physical dimension. CERN has not simply discovered a new, exotic subatomic particle to neatly add to our existing tables. They have found a crack in the matrix. They have stumbled upon a gaping, invisible wound in the fabric of space-time where the energy of our physical world is actively draining away into an entirely unseen parallel infrastructure. This is the terrifying dawn of what theoretical physicists are now calling the dark sector. The dark sector is not merely a region of deep space or a collection of dead, empty voids. It is a massive, highly complex, and entirely invisible architectural layer of reality that exists completely outside the boundaries of the standard model. It is a hidden universe that operates by its own terrifying rulebook, utilizing forces, particles, and physical laws that we cannot see, cannot touch, and until this exact moment, could not even begin to comprehend. The realization that energy from our world is actively bleeding into the dark sector fundamentally changes the entire context of human existence. It proves that the physical universe we have spent thousands of years meticulously studying and mapping is nothing more than a shallow, superficial interface. The standard model, the crowning achievement of our species, was never the complete blueprint of reality. It was merely the instruction manual for the incredibly thin, localized skin of the cosmos. We have been sitting in a dark theater, staring obsessively at a tiny, illuminated stage, completely unaware of the massive, sprawling, and highly active machinery grinding away in the pitch-black shadows just beyond the spotlight. Tonight, we are going to launch a full-scale investigation into this terrifying anomaly at the Large Hadron Collider. We are going to strip away the comforting illusions of classical physics and witness the agonizing, necessary death of our current scientific textbooks. We are going to explore the exact mechanisms of how energy is bleeding through the dimensional barrier, and we will confront the chilling, undeniable realization that we are completely blind to the true scale of our own reality. The discovery of the dark sector forces us to accept that we are intimately sharing our physical space with a massive, invisible universe. Right now, as you sit listening to these words, entire hidden structures, invisible galaxies of unknown matter, and incomprehensible forces are occupying the exact same three-dimensional coordinates as your physical body, passing right through you without leaving a single trace. We will investigate the profound panic currently gripping the global scientific establishment as they scramble to understand a universe that has suddenly become infinitely larger, darker, and more hostile to human logic. We will look at the terrifying implications of what happens when our dimension violently interacts with this unseen parallel infrastructure, and we will ask the ultimate, existential question. If the standard model is broken, and our localized physical reality is merely a fraction of the true cosmos, what kind of unseen monsters are actually lurking in the dark? We are stepping off the edge of the known map, leaving the safety of mathematical certainty behind and plunging directly into the abyss of the dark sector. To truly grasp the sheer existential terror currently bleeding through the heavily fortified corridors of CERN, we must first understand the apocalyptic violence that humanity has engineered deep beneath the European soil. The Large Hadron Collider is not merely a scientific instrument. It is the most complex, unforgiving, and precise machine ever constructed by human hands. It is a 27-kilometer subterranean ring of supercooled electromagnets, chilled with liquid helium to a temperature colder than the freezing vacuum of deep space. Inside this immaculate circular tomb, physicists take the fundamental building blocks of normal matter protons, stripped entirely of their electrons, and forcefully inject them into the absolute void of the beam pipes. Using unimaginably powerful magnetic fields, these protons are accelerated to a speed that practically defies the limits of reality. They are pushed to 99.9999% of the absolute speed limit of the universe, the speed of light. At this terrifying velocity, these subatomic bullets are no longer just particles. They are highly concentrated, lethal packets of pure kinetic energy, racing around the massive ring over 11,000 times every single second. The ultimate objective of this colossal machine is not observation, but total, catastrophic destruction. The accelerating protons are divided into two counter-rotating beams, meticulously guided by the electromagnets, and then violently forced to cross paths inside the hearts of massive, cathedral-sized detectors such as Atlas and CMS. When these protons collide head-on at nearly the speed of light, they do not simply break apart like colliding billiard balls. The sheer, localized violence of the impact is so profound that the protons are completely annihilated. The crushing kinetic energy of their forward momentum is instantly, explosively converted directly into mass, forging a microscopic, fleeting shower of brand new, highly exotic, and heavily unstable subatomic particles. For an infinitesimal fraction of a yoctosecond, the collision chamber perfectly recreates the absolute, chaotic hellfire that existed just moments after the detonation of the Big Bang itself. To decipher the chaotic aftermath of this subatomic apocalypse, the physicists at CERN act as the ultimate, unforgiving cosmic accountants. The entire experiment, and indeed the entire foundation of modern science, relies completely on the most sacred, unbreakable law of physics, the strict conservation of energy. It is the ironclad rule that dictates energy can never be created out of nothing, and it can never, under any circumstances, be destroyed. It can only change forms. Therefore, before the protons are forced to collide, the supercomputers know the exact, precise amount of energy entering the chamber. After the violent collision, the massive layers of the detectors, the silicon trackers, the electromagnetic calorimeters, and the heavy muon chambers meticulously capture, track, and measure every single piece of subatomic shrapnel spraying outward from the blast. When the cosmic accountants tally up the mass, the velocity, and the trajectory of the resulting debris, the final mathematical ledger must balance perfectly to zero. The total sum of the energy coming out of the collision must flawlessly, without exception, equal the total sum of the energy that went into it. For decades, the Standard Model has proudly balanced this ledger, predicting the exact spray of debris with a level of accuracy that bordered on the divine. But deep within the recent, highly classified data runs, the immaculate ledger has failed. A terrifying glitch has appeared in the mathematics of the void, and it is actively tearing the scientific establishment apart. When the supercomputers at CERN tally up the chaotic debris of these apocalyptic collisions, they are discovering a massive, inexplicable deficit. They are encountering a horrifying phenomenon known in particle physics as missing transverse energy. The math simply does not balance. The protons enter the chamber with a specific, known amount of energy, the violent collision occurs, but when the detectors measure the resulting explosion, a terrifying percentage of the blast is simply gone. It does not register as light, it does not register as heat, it does not register as any known particle within the vast catalogue of the Standard Model. It simply vanishes from the collision point, leaving behind an unbalanced equation and a profound, haunting silence in the detectors. This missing energy is not a rounding error, it is not a glitch in the software, and it is certainly not a malfunction of the hardware. The detectors at CERN are so unimaginably precise that they can track the curved path of a single, decaying particle smaller than an atom. They do not lose energy. They record reality exactly as it happens. But the anomaly deepens, moving beyond simple missing energy and striking at the very structural symmetry of the cosmos. Physicists are observing a phenomenon that entirely violates a bedrock principle known as lepton universality. According to the absolute laws of the Standard Model, certain fundamental particles, like the electron and its heavier cousin, the muon, must behave identically when interacting with the fundamental forces of nature. They are supposed to be perfect, interchangeable twins, differing only in their mass. When heavy, unstable particles known as beauty quarks are forged in the LHC collisions, the mathematics dictate that they must decay into electrons and muons at the exact same rate. It is a perfectly symmetrical coin flip, but the universe is cheating. The data pouring out of the LHC is proving that the coin is heavily weighted. The beauty quarks are decaying into electrons far more often than they are decaying into muons. The pristine, mathematical symmetry of the Standard Model is actively cracking under the immense pressure of the data. Something completely invisible, something entirely unknown to our physics, is actively interfering with the decay process, silently pulling the strings of the subatomic world and violently distorting the outcome. When we combine the terrifying reality of the missing transverse energy with the blatant, unexplainable violation of lepton universality, we are forced to confront an existential nightmare that completely alters the trajectory of human knowledge. If the detectors are flawless, and if the absolute law of the conservation of energy remains unbroken, meaning the missing energy cannot possibly be destroyed, then there is only one logical, mathematically sound, and utterly terrifying conclusion left. The energy is escaping. It is surviving the apocalyptic collision, but it is fleeing the scene in a vehicle that completely refuses to interact with our physical universe. The missing energy is being carried away by a ghost. It is being stolen by a newly forged, invisible particle that possesses no electrical charge and feels no strong nuclear force. Because it refuses to interact with the heavy, dense materials of the CERN detectors, it flies right through the silicon, the lead, and the solid bedrock of the Earth as if they do not even exist. The catastrophic collision of the protons has essentially ripped a microscopic, temporary tear in the fabric of our reality, and the explosive energy of our universe is violently bleeding out through that wound. The math does not balance because we are only looking at one half of the ledger. We are witnessing the physical, undeniable proof that the localized, three-dimensional grid we call home is not an isolated, closed system. The energy is not vanishing into a dead, empty nothingness. It is actively, physically leaking into an unseen, parallel infrastructure. It is pouring directly into the dark sector. This is exactly why the global physics community is currently drowning in a state of academic panic. The ghost in the machine is not a mechanical error. It is a messenger. It is the very first terrifying footprint of an invisible universe that sits right beside our own, quietly draining the energy of our reality into a dark, impenetrable abyss. To comprehend the true scale of the existential nightmare unfolding beneath the surface of Geneva, we must pull our gaze away from the microscopic, violent collisions of the Large Hadron Collider and look outward into the sprawling, freezing abyss of the cosmos. We must confront a psychological condition that has plagued human civilization since the very first moment our ancient ancestors looked up at the night sky and believed they were seeing the entirety of creation. We must confront the profound, deeply ingrained arrogance of matter. When you look around your immediate environment, you are completely overwhelmed by a sense of total, unyielding physical reality. You feel the heavy, undeniable solidity of the ground beneath your feet. You observe the towering steel and glass monuments of our cities. You feel the radiating warmth of the sun on your skin, and you look through highly advanced, multi-billion-dollar telescopes to map the swirling, luminous arms of distant galaxies. Because our biological evolutionary hardware is strictly, narrowly tuned to interact with this physical stuff to see the visible spectrum of light, to feel thermal radiation, to process the electromagnetic friction of atoms bumping into other atoms, we naturally, arrogantly assume that this interacting physical stuff is the main event. We believe that the glowing, burning matter we can see, touch, and measure constitutes the vast, overwhelming majority of the universe. We view the pitch-black, empty space between the stars as nothing more than a lifeless, silent stage upon which the grand, physical drama of human existence is performed. But modern astrophysics has violently dragged humanity out of this comforting, localized delusion, presenting us with a mathematical reality that is so profoundly humiliating it borders on the absurd. When cosmologists actually catalogue the total mass and energy of the entire observable universe, measuring the gravitational pull of the sprawling galaxy clusters and tracking the violently expanding fabric of space-time itself, they arrive at a chilling, indisputable cosmic inventory. Everything that humanity has ever seen, touched, or interacted with. Every single grain of sand on Earth, every drop of water in our oceans, every human being who has ever lived, every burning star, every swirling nebula, and every supermassive black hole hiding in the dark. All of it. Every single piece of normal, baryonic matter governed by the pristine equations of the Standard Model accounts for barely 5% of the total universe. The reality you experience, the physical world that completely dominates your senses and dictates your entire scientific understanding, is nothing more than a superficial, nearly statistically insignificant rounding error. You are living on the thinnest, most fragile layer of cosmic foam, floating blindly on the surface of an unfathomably deep and entirely invisible ocean. So, what exactly is the rest of it? What constitutes the overwhelming 95% of reality that completely surrounds us, suffocating our tiny pocket of visible light? For decades, astronomers have stared into the deep void and identified the massive, invisible gravitational ghosts haunting the cosmos. They watched galaxies spinning at terrifying, impossible speeds, rotating so fast that the visible mass of their stars should have been violently ripped apart and flung outward into the freezing vacuum. The only mathematical reason these galaxies hold their shape is because they are completely encased in a massive, invisible skeleton of gravitational glue, an unknown, untouchable substance we blindly labeled dark matter. Furthermore, they looked at the massive macroscopic expansion of the universe and realized it was not slowing down under the weight of its own gravity, but was violently accelerating, driven outward by a repulsive, unseen pressure we simply called dark energy. Together, this massive dark shadow dictates the entire physical architecture of the cosmos. Our glowing stars are merely captive prisoners, caught in the invisible web of a much larger, darker beast. However, to protect our fragile scientific egos and maintain the illusion of human supremacy, the global physics community historically adopted a deeply comforting, yet fundamentally flawed assumption about this 95% shadow. Because we could not see it, touch it, or force it to interact with our highly sensitive particle detectors, we conveniently assumed that the dark universe was entirely simple. We believed it was just heavy, dead, and incredibly boring. We hypothesized that dark matter was composed of sluggish, weakly interacting particles that possessed absolutely no internal structure, no chemistry, and no complex forces. We viewed the dark sector as a vast, silent graveyard of inert dust, serving no other purpose than to provide the heavy, dumb gravitational scaffolding required to hold our brilliant, glowing 5% universe together. We essentially believed that the dark universe was a lifeless, empty theater, and we, the brilliant, complex biological creatures made of normal matter, were the only actors worthy of the stage. But the terrifying, inexplicable anomalies currently bleeding out of the Large Hadron Collider have violently murdered this comforting assumption. The missing transverse energy, the glitching decays of the beauty quarks, and the sudden, violent violation of the Standard Model's most sacred symmetries all point to a radically different, incredibly hostile reality. If the massive amounts of energy from our apocalyptic proton collisions are actively escaping our dimension, it means the dark sector is completely capable of absorbing, processing, and interacting with that energy. Dead, inert cosmic dust does not actively siphon kinetic energy out of a localized subatomic collision. Only a structured, interactive, and highly dynamic system can do that. The mathematics pouring out of the subterranean detectors at CERN heavily suggests that the invisible universe is not a silent, dead weight. It is awake, it is active, and it is buzzing with an incomprehensible level of structural complexity that we are entirely blind to. We are being forcefully awakened to the reality that the dark sector is an entire, fully realized ecosystem that exists completely divorced from our localized physical reality. If the 95% shadow is capable of actively interacting with the fleeting energy of our world, even for a fraction of a nanosecond, it mathematically guarantees that the dark universe possesses its own unique set of fundamental laws, its own varied species of dark particles, and its own entirely alien forces of nature. We are no longer looking at a universe filled with dead, heavy cosmic sand. We are looking at the terrifying possibility of an invisible, parallel infrastructure that is infinitely more complex, vast, and active than our own. It forces us to completely invert our understanding of what is normal. We are not the standard baseline of the cosmos. We are the weird, glowing exception. Normal matter is the cosmic anomaly. This realization utterly shatters the arrogance of matter. We are not the main characters of the cosmos, proudly standing in the center of a dead, empty void. We are a microscopic, 5% minority, a rare and bizarre glitch of glowing energy hopelessly embedded within a massive, thriving, invisible metropolis. The dark sector does not exist simply to hold our galaxies together. It exists for itself, operating on an unimaginably vast scale, completely indifferent to the superficial, localized hallucination we call the physical world. The space you are currently occupying, the room you are sitting in, and the very air you are breathing are not empty. They are absolutely saturated with the dense, complex machinery of the dark sector. Invisible particles governed by unknown forces are operating silently and continuously right through the biological atoms of your body. You are a ghost wandering through a bustling, invisible city, completely unaware of the massive traffic passing directly through your skull. The anomalies at CERN are merely the first faint scratches on the dimensional wall, proving that the silent shadow that constitutes 95% of our reality is actively moving in the dark, and it is far more complex than we ever dared to imagine. To truly understand the terrifying nature of the intruder currently bleeding out of the apocalyptic collisions at the Large Hadron Collider, we must first deeply examine the absolute foundation of our own visibility. How do you actually experience the universe? When you look up at the night sky and see the faint, cold light of a distant star, or when you feel the radiant, burning heat of the sun on your skin, you are engaging in a highly specific, localized interaction with the fundamental machinery of our 5% world. You are interacting with the electromagnetic force, but forces in the universe do not just happen by magic. They do not magically reach across the empty, freezing void of space to push or pull on physical matter. In the rigorous, mechanical framework of quantum physics, every fundamental force requires a physical carrier, a microscopic, subatomic messenger whose entire existence is dedicated to transmitting that specific interaction from one piece of matter to another. In our localized, normal universe, the glowing, baryonic minority of reality, the absolute, undisputed king of these messengers, is the photon. The standard photon is the fundamental particle of light, and it is the sole carrier of the electromagnetic force. It is the architect of our entire physical existence. It is the invisible tether that binds negatively charged electrons to the heavy, positively charged nuclei of atoms, allowing them to form the complex, sprawling molecules that build the heavy iron in your blood and the solid carbon of the earth. Every chemical reaction, every biological process, and every single electrical impulse currently firing in your brain to process these words is entirely dependent on the continuous, chaotic exchange of trillions of standard photons. This messenger particle is pristine, elegant, and mathematically perfect. It possesses absolutely zero resting mass, which allows it to travel effortlessly at the absolute cosmic speed limit of roughly 300,000 kilometers per second. It is the ultimate bridge between the isolated particles of our physical reality, holding the entire, fragile architecture of our 5% world together. But as we have already established, the remaining 95% of the cosmos is not a dead, formless soup of isolated particles. The dark universe is awake. It is a buzzing, highly active, and structurally complex ecosystem that is entirely capable of siphoning energy directly out of our subterranean collision. If the dark matter that dominates the sprawling architecture of the cosmos can clump together, if it can form massive, invisible halos that dictate the violent rotation of entire galaxies, then it absolutely cannot be a collection of blind, solitary particles randomly drifting in the dark. It must have a way to communicate within itself. It must possess its own internal architecture, its own complex chemistry, and its own fundamental forces pushing and pulling its invisible matter into shape. But the dark universe cannot possibly use our standard photons to communicate. If dark matter interacted with our light, it would not be dark. It would glow with electromagnetic radiation. It would reflect the light of our stars, and it would cast massive, undeniable shadows across our multi-billion-dollar telescopes. The fundamental, defining characteristic of the dark sector is that it is completely, violently blind to our electromagnetic spectrum. Therefore, if the invisible universe is highly structured but completely ignores our light, it must possess its own distinct, alien messenger. Theoretical physicists have stared into this dark abyss and given this terrifying hypothetical entity a name, the dark photon. The dark photon is theorized to be the exact mirror counterpart to our standard particle of light, but it operates under a completely alien and deeply unsettling rulebook. While our localized photons are sleek, massless entities that zip across the universe at the speed of light, the mathematics suggest that the dark photon is heavy. It is a sluggish, massive subatomic carrier that transmits a brand new, terrifying force of nature known as dark electromagnetism. It is the fundamental glue that holds the invisible universe together, allowing dark atoms to interact, dark structures to form, and dark chemistry to operate entirely undetected in the pitch-black void right beside us. For decades, this heavy, invisible messenger was nothing more than a mathematical ghost. It was a desperate hypothesis, scribbled on the whiteboards of theoretical physicists, an invisible variable required to explain the unseen complexities of the cosmos. Because the dark photon only interacts with dark charges, and because our standard photons only interact with normal electrical charges, the two messengers should be completely, permanently isolated from one another. The barrier between our glowing 5% world and their massive 95% shadow should be an impenetrable absolute dimensional wall. We should never be able to see their light, and they should never be able to feel our heat. We were supposed to be safe in our isolation. But the sheer apocalyptic violence of the Large Hadron Collider does not respect the polite boundaries of dimensional walls. When we strip normal protons down to their absolute core and violently smash them together at 99.9999% the speed of light, we are generating a microscopic fireball of such unimaginable density and localized heat that the fundamental fabric of reality itself begins to warp, fray, and break down. In the chaotic, blinding fraction of a yoctosecond following the impact, the strict, localized rules of the standard model are violently suppressed by the sheer magnitude of the kinetic energy. The universe becomes entirely fluid. The rigid boundary separating our physical world from the dark sector is stretched to its absolute breaking point. Within this microscopic inferno, physicists believe they are witnessing a terrifying, reality-breaking subatomic phenomenon known as kinetic mixing. The violent, explosive electromagnetic energy generated by the shattered protons creates a localized storm of standard, everyday photons. But the energy in the collision chamber is so extreme, and the proximity to the foundational, underlying matrix of reality is so incredibly close that a spontaneous, impossible translation occurs. A standard photon, vibrating with apocalyptic, artificial energy, suddenly and violently oscillates. It shifts its mathematical frequency. In a flash of subatomic alchemy, the standard particle of light physically transforms, adopting the heavy mass and the alien properties of the dark sector. The standard photon forcefully mutates into a dark photon. The exact microsecond this transformation occurs, the particle completely and irreversibly drops off the radar of human science. It ceases to interact with the highly sensitive silicon trackers, it ignores the heavy lead glass calorimeters, and it completely bypasses the massive, supercooled electromagnetic fields of the CERN detectors. It becomes a true ghost. Because it is now a dark photon, it is instantly bound by the alien laws of the dark sector. It effortlessly passes through the incredibly dense, heavy machinery of the Large Hadron Collider and the solid bedrock of the Earth, as if our physical world were nothing more than an empty, meaningless vacuum. It carries the raw, kinetic energy of the collision straight out of our dimension, bleeding through the porous wall of reality, and vanishes entirely into the invisible metropolis that surrounds us. This is the horrifying, physical explanation for the missing transverse energy. The terrifying mathematical deficit that is currently driving the global physics community into a state of total academic panic is not a miscalculation, a software glitch, or a mechanical failure. It is a footprint. It is the exact smoking gun signature of a dark photon being violently born in our universe, briefly crossing the dimensional barrier and escaping into the dark. We are not just looking at a simple absence of energy, we are actively capturing the very first fleeting bridge between our localized reality and the massive alien infrastructure of the shadow universe. The existence of the dark photon completely shatters the comforting illusion of our cosmic isolation. It definitively proves that the dark universe is not a completely sealed, unreachable vault safely locked away from our physical existence. The wall is porous. The matrix has a physical crack in it. If a heavy messenger particle from their world can be forced to temporarily step into ours, violently absorbing our energy before retreating back into the impenetrable shadows, we have officially established contact with an ecosystem we cannot comprehend. The dark photon is the ultimate cosmic intruder. It is an invisible spy crossing the border of physical reality, carrying stolen energy back to a complex, thriving, and massively heavy universe that we cannot see, cannot touch, and cannot defend against. It forces humanity to face the chilling realization that the fundamental forces of nature we thought governed the entirety of existence are merely a shallow, localized dialect, and the dark photon is the first whispered, terrifying word from an entirely different cosmic language currently being spoken in the pitch-black space right in front of our eyes. The discovery of the dark photon is not merely a localized subatomic anomaly buried deep within the heavily shielded concrete tunnels of Geneva. It is the pulling of a loose, invisible thread that threatens to completely unravel the entire fabric of our cosmic isolation. If we are forced to mathematically accept that the 95% shadow of the universe possesses its own messenger particle, its own heavy, alien version of light, we are immediately forced to confront a terrifying, inescapable logical progression. In the rigorous architecture of quantum physics, a messenger cannot exist in a vacuum. A particle of force, whether it belongs to our glowing reality or the pitch-black void, requires both a sender and a receiver to serve any structural purpose. In our 5% universe, the standard photon is the absolute architect of physical reality. It is the binding electromagnetic agent that forcefully pulls negatively charged electrons into stable, endless orbits around heavy, positively charged protons. It is the sole mechanism that forges the complex, sprawling architecture of atoms. Without the photon, our universe would be a chaotic, formless soup of disconnected, dead mass. Therefore, if the dark sector has its own invisible light, it must logically possess its own invisible matter specifically designed to interact with that light. The massive, unseen shadow that dominates the cosmos is not a uniform, dead ocean of isolated, sluggish particles. It is a highly structured, intricately bound, and heavily interactive reality. The profound panic currently echoing through the halls of theoretical physics is not born from the mere existence of a single missing particle. The panic stems from the monstrous, sprawling implications of what a dark photon is actually capable of building. Physicists are staring blindly into the terrifying, boundless abyss of a concept known as dark chemistry. In our localized world, the simple, chaotic interaction of light and matter over billions of years gave rise to the periodic table of elements. That table represents a diverse, violent, and beautiful array of substances that can burn with nuclear fire, freeze into crystalline ice, shatter under pressure, and eventually arrange themselves into the biological hardware required to produce human consciousness. If the dark sector utilizes its own dark electromagnetism, it inevitably possesses its own alien periodic table. The math heavily implies the existence of dark electrons orbiting dark nuclei, forging stable, invisible dark atoms. These alien atoms bond together, actively sharing dark energy and structural forces to create complex, incredibly heavy dark molecules. We are no longer looking at an empty void. We are looking at an unseen universe that is fully capable of experiencing its own extreme thermodynamic reactions, its own bizarre states of matter, and its own unimaginably complex structural evolution. Once you introduce the terrifying, mathematically sound reality of dark chemistry, the scale of the cosmic horror exponentially expands beyond the limits of human comprehension. Gravity, the grand, inescapable equalizer of the cosmos, acts upon dark matter exactly as it acts upon normal, glowing matter. Over the course of the 14 billion years since the detonation of the Big Bang, the sprawling, massive clouds of dark atoms have not simply drifted aimlessly and silently through the expanding void. They have been violently, relentlessly pulled together by the crushing weight of their own massive gravitational fields. As these colossal dark clouds collapse inward upon themselves, the intense friction of dark chemistry ignites. Deep within the invisible shadows of our own Milky Way galaxy, entirely unseen, massive celestial bodies are being forged in the dark. There are dark stars burning with invisible alien nuclear fire, radiating heavy, undetectable dark photons into the pitch-black void. There are sprawling, complex, dark planetary systems caught in the gravitational embrace of these unseen suns, composed of dense, exotic dark minerals and dark gases that our physical instruments could never measure, see, or comprehend. Because the dark sector accounts for roughly 95% of the total mass and energy of the cosmos, the sheer statistical probability of its internal complexity absolutely dwarfs our own. We possess a periodic table of slightly over 100 known elements. The dark sector, with its overwhelming abundance of mass and energy, could possess a periodic table boasting thousands of stable, complex elements, allowing for the construction of materials, structures, and potentially even dark biological analogues that completely defy human logic. We are forced to consider the chilling possibility of entire invisible dark galaxies, complete with dark nebulae, dark supermassive black holes, and dark interstellar dust, existing as a massive, thriving mirror realm right alongside our own. But the true, existential nightmare of this mirror realm is not just that it exists out there in the freezing, unfathomable depths of deep space. The paralyzing horror lies in the geometric reality that it exists exactly where you are sitting right now. Because dark matter is completely, violently immune to the standard electromagnetic force of our normal world, the two universes do not physically collide in the traditional sense. The solid, physical boundaries that define your entire reality, the thick concrete walls of your home, the heavy iron core of the Earth, the dense, protective atmosphere of our planet, and the very skin on your bones mean absolutely nothing to the dark sector. To a complex dark molecule, our entire glowing 5% universe is nothing more than a faint, meaningless, and entirely permeable ghost. We do not physically interact, we do not touch. We simply occupy the exact same three-dimensional spatial coordinates, passing through one another like completely blind phantoms haunting the same ruined house. This realization brings the massive, incomprehensible scale of astrophysics down to a deeply personal, claustrophobic level of dread. You are currently trapped on the surface of a tiny, fragile, rocky planet, spinning helplessly through a massive, highly active, and entirely invisible metropolis. As the Earth hurtles through the spiral arm of the Milky Way galaxy at hundreds of thousands of miles per hour, dragging the Moon and humanity along with it, we are constantly, blindly plowing through the dense, heavy infrastructure of the dark sector. Entire invisible dark galaxies, massive swirling clouds of structured dark chemistry, and unimaginably heavy dark stars are currently passing directly through our solar system, completely unimpeded by the blazing plasma of our sun or the solid rock of our world. At this exact, precise microsecond, an unfathomable amount of dark matter, perhaps complex dark molecules, or the unseen remnants of a shattered dark planet, is passing directly through the roof of your house. It is plunging straight down through the fragile biological tissue of your brain, slicing silently through your beating heart, and continuing its unbroken trajectory down through the molten core of the Earth without slowing down for a fraction of a millisecond. You are completely and utterly saturated by an alien universe. Your physical body is entirely porous to the overwhelming majority of reality. Human beings evolved over millions of years to react to physical threats. They could see and feel a predator moving in the tall grass, a falling stone, a burning fire. We are biologically and psychologically unequipped to process the terrifying concept of massive, heavy, and potentially highly structured alien objects moving continuously through our internal organs. We have spent the entirety of human history looking up at the night sky, feeling a profound sense of cosmic loneliness, wondering if we are the only active, complex structures in a dead, empty universe. The discovery of the dark sector violently corrects this misconception, replacing our loneliness with a profound, terrifying demotion. We are not alone. We are simply the completely ignored minority. We are microscopic, glowing anomalies hopelessly embedded within a sprawling, invisible empire that we can never truly interact with. The physics establishment is panicking because they have finally realized that humanity is not sitting safely inside an empty room looking out the window at the cosmos. We are standing in the middle of a crowded, deafening, and violently active invisible highway, completely blind to the monstrous traffic of the dark sector continuously rushing right through our bones. To fully comprehend the sheer, paralyzing terror gripping the global theoretical physics community in the wake of the CERN anomalies, we must first examine the absolute sanctity of the rulebook that has just been violently torn to shreds. For generations, human civilization has sought to distill the overwhelming, chaotic complexity of the cosmos into a neat, manageable, and mathematically pristine set of fundamental laws. We looked at the infinite diversity of the physical world, the sprawling galaxies, the burning stars, the frozen oceans, and the complex biological machinery of our own bodies, and we proudly reduced it all down to just 4 absolute pillars of reality. These are the 4 fundamental forces of nature. They are the invisible hands that shape the entire 5% minority of the visible universe, dictating every single interaction, every movement, and every physical consequence from the exact moment of the Big Bang to the present second. We believed with absolute and unshakable hubris that these 4 rules were the exhaustive, final vocabulary of the cosmos. The first and most familiar of these pillars is gravity. It is the grand, overarching architect of the macrocosm. It is the inescapable, attractive force that reaches across the freezing, empty expanse of the void to pull dead dust into burning stars, to bind those stars into sprawling, majestic galaxies, and to anchor our fragile feet to the spinning crust of the earth. It is the weakest of the four forces, yet it commands the largest stage, bending the very geometric fabric of space and time to its will. The second pillar is electromagnetism, the brilliant, chaotic builder of the microscopic world. It is the force that governs the interaction between electrically charged particles, the force carried by the standard photon. It is the reason the solid chair beneath you does not collapse, the reason atoms can bond to form the complex molecules of life, and the reason you can perceive the visible spectrum of light. Electromagnetism is the author of all chemistry and all biology. As we dive deeper into the claustrophobic, incredibly dense heart of normal matter, we encounter the final two pillars, operating entirely out of human sight within the microscopic vault of the atomic nucleus. The strong nuclear force is the absolute, tyrannical binder of reality. It is the unimaginably powerful glue that forces positively charged protons to stay crushed together in the core of an atom, violently overpowering their natural electromagnetic desire to violently repel one another. Without the strong force, every atom in the universe would instantly, catastrophically detonate, reducing physical reality to a diffuse, dead cloud of subatomic shrapnel. Finally, there is the weak nuclear force, the silent, slow agent of decay and transmutation. It is the fundamental force responsible for radioactive decay, pulling the strings behind the scenes to dictate how unstable particles break down, and it is the exact mechanism that allows the sun to burn with sustained, life-giving nuclear fusion over billions of years. For nearly a century, these four fundamental forces were enough. They were a closed, perfect loop of logic. Every single experiment, every chemical reaction, every falling apple, and every exploding supernova could be flawlessly explained by the complex, mathematical interplay of gravity, electromagnetism, and the strong and weak nuclear forces. We believed that if a phenomenon could not be explained by one of these four pillars, it simply could not exist. But the terrifying, apocalyptic data bleeding out of the Large Hadron Collider has completely annihilated this comforting illusion. The missing transverse energy and the glitching, asymmetrical decay of beauty quarks are not merely mathematical oddities. They are a direct, undeniable act of rebellion against the four pillars of reality. When the supercomputers at CERN meticulously analyze the vanishing energy escaping the collision chambers, they aggressively attempt to assign the anomaly to one of the known forces. They run the simulations, desperately trying to force the data to fit into the established rulebook, but the math violently rejects the attempt. The ghost particle carrying the energy away into the void cannot be interacting via electromagnetism, because it produces absolutely no light and leaves no trace in the heavy, charged layers of the detectors. It cannot be interacting via the strong nuclear force, because it completely ignores the incredibly dense nuclei of the atoms constructing the machine, passing through miles of solid bedrock without triggering a single collision. It completely ignores the weak nuclear force, showcasing no signs of standard radioactive decay. And gravity, while universal, is mathematically far too weak on the microscopic subatomic scale to actively siphon away massive, concentrated bursts of kinetic energy in a fraction of a yoctosecond. The four pillars of reality are completely blind to the anomaly. They are fundamentally incapable of explaining how the energy of our localized universe is bleeding into the 95% shadow of the dark sector. This forces theoretical physicists into a dark, suffocating corner where only one terrifying, inescapable conclusion remains. If the four known forces of nature cannot account for the interaction, there must be a fifth. The anomaly points directly, mathematically, and undeniably to the existence of a fifth fundamental force of nature. We have not just found a new particle, we have discovered an entirely new, alien rulebook that governs the invisible cosmos, a rulebook that we possess absolutely no ability to read, predict, or control. This fifth force represents a monumental, paradigm-shattering demotion for human science. It proves that the elegant, pristine standard model is nothing more than a localized dialect, a simplistic set of rules that only applies to the superficial 5% skin of the universe. The fifth force is the dark, heavy architecture holding the rest of reality together. It is the alien mechanism that dictates the sprawling complexities of dark chemistry, binding dark atoms into massive invisible structures, and governing the slow, unseen evolution of the mirror realm. For billions of years, this fifth force has been operating silently in the background, completely divorced from our physical existence, heavily dictating the flow of the cosmos while completely ignoring the fragile, glowing biological creatures trapped on the surface of the Earth. But the true, paralyzing horror of the fifth force is not simply that it exists. The horror lies in the terrifying, experimentally verified fact that it acts as a bridge. Under normal, everyday conditions, the dimensional wall between our four forces and their alien fifth force is thick, impenetrable, and absolutely silent. But under conditions of extreme, apocalyptic cosmic violence, such as the massive, high-speed proton collisions engineered deep underground in Geneva, or the crushing, chaotic heart of a dying supernova, the dimensional wall frays, the boundaries blur. In these fleeting, violent microseconds, the fifth force lashes out. It briefly, violently intersects with our own localized reality, reaching across the subatomic void to temporarily interact with normal matter. It uses the dark photon as its heavy, invisible messenger, grabbing the kinetic energy generated by our four forces and dragging it forcefully back into the pitch-black abyss of the dark sector. The discovery of the fifth force means that our universe is not a sealed, protected vault. Our reality is a highly porous membrane, constantly suspended in a terrifyingly fragile state of tension with a massive, invisible ecosystem that operates by rules we cannot even begin to fathom. The very idea that a fundamental law of physics exists purely to facilitate the bleeding of energy between dimensions completely shatters the illusion of our safety. It means that the seemingly solid, dependable physical world we rely on is subjected to the unseen whims of an alien force that occasionally, violently decides to reach through the dark and rewrite the outcome of our subatomic collisions. We are no longer the masters of our physical domain. We are merely passengers in a universe where the most powerful and influential laws of nature are deliberately hiding in the shadows, revealing their terrifying existence only when they reach across the dimensional divide to steal our energy and remind us of our absolute, inescapable insignificance. To the uninitiated public, the romanticized narrative of scientific discovery is almost always portrayed as a joyous, triumphant march toward enlightenment. We imagine brilliant minds in pristine laboratories, cheering and popping champagne as a new piece of the cosmic puzzle neatly snaps into place, expanding our grand understanding of reality. But within the claustrophobic, highly competitive, and intensely rigorous world of elite theoretical physics, true paradigm shifts are rarely greeted with celebration. When a discovery fundamentally alters the foundational bedrock of a scientific discipline, the prevailing emotion is not excitement, it is a profound, creeping, and absolute dread. Behind the locked doors of university faculties and deep within the concrete bunkers of CERN, The confirmation of the missing transverse energy and the terrifying specter of the dark sector have not sparked a triumphant celebration. Instead, they have triggered a silent, catastrophic academic panic. To understand why the greatest minds on the planet are currently staring at their chalkboards in a state of existential paralysis, we must critically examine the fragile, immaculate architecture of the theory that is currently bleeding to death right in front of their eyes. We must look at the Standard Model not simply as a list of particles, but as a meticulously balanced, perfectly rigid, mathematical house of cards. For the past half-century, the Standard Model has been taught in every university on Earth as the definitive, ultimate gospel of the physical universe. But the true beauty and the ultimate fatal flaw of the Standard Model is that it is an entirely closed mathematical loop. It is not a loose, flexible framework where you can simply add new discoveries as you stumble upon them. It is an incredibly tight, deeply entangled web of pristine symmetries. Within this framework, the existence, the mass, and the behavior of every single fundamental particle are intimately mathematically linked to all the others. The heavy mass of the top quark is directly tied to the invisible mechanism of the Higgs boson, and the strength of the electromagnetic force is perfectly counterbalanced by the precise behavior of the weak nuclear force. If you change a single, microscopic variable, if you slightly alter the mass of an electron, or slightly tweak the strength of the strong nuclear force, the mathematical equations do not simply adjust. They violently, completely break down. The equations suddenly begin generating impossible infinities. The physical laws of the universe collapse, and the mathematical model predicts a reality that instantly tears itself apart. The Standard Model is a flawless, crystalline structure that demands absolute perfection. It works magnificently, but only if it remains entirely untouched and hermetically sealed. This fragile, closed-loop perfection is the exact reason why the discovery of a fifth fundamental force and a massive, interacting dark sector is the ultimate doomsday scenario for modern physics. The anomaly bleeding out of the Large Hadron Collider is not a missing puzzle piece that can be gently slotted into the existing framework. It is a mathematical wrecking ball. When theoretical physicists attempt to take the terrifying new data, the heavy, invisible dark photon, and the alien force of dark electromagnetism, and forcibly write it into the pristine equations of the Standard Model, the entire house of cards instantly, catastrophically collapses. If a fifth force exists, and if it is capable of reaching across the dimensional barrier to interact with normal matter, even for a fraction of a nanosecond, it mathematically contaminates everything. It means that the underlying quantum fields that govern our reality are constantly being subjected to the unseen gravitational and electromagnetic pressures of an alien universe. If this is the true nature of reality, then the absolute perfection of the Standard Model was nothing more than a spectacular mathematical coincidence. The terrifying realization crashing down upon the scientific establishment is that their most brilliant, Nobel Prize-winning equations are fundamentally, irreparably wrong from the ground up. If the dark sector has been constantly interacting with our universe, even weakly, since the explosive detonation of the Big Bang, then every single calculation we have made regarding the mass of particles, the expansion of the cosmos, and the fundamental interactions of quantum mechanics has been built on a foundation of missing variables. Physicists have spent the last 50 years building towering superstructures of advanced theories like supersymmetry, string theory, and quantum loop gravity, all predicated on the absolute assumption that the foundational concrete of the Standard Model was solid. Now, looking at the data from Geneva, they realize that the concrete is rotting, the foundation has completely dissolved, and the entire towering intellectual cathedral is coming down with it. We are witnessing the most violent, humiliating demotion in the entire history of human intellect. Centuries ago, Nicolaus Copernicus forced humanity to accept that the Earth was not the center of the solar system. Decades ago, Edwin Hubble forced us to accept that the Milky Way was not the entirety of the universe, but just one tiny speck in a sprawling, expanding void. But the discovery of the dark sector represents an infinitely more profound and terrifying demotion. It is not just our physical location that is insignificant, it is the very laws of physics that govern us. The panic echoing through the academic world is born from the chilling, undeniable realization that our most advanced physics, the absolute peak of human cognitive achievement, was never the universal law of the cosmos. It was nothing more than a shallow, incredibly localized approximation of reality. Think of a brilliant, isolated civilization of aquatic creatures living their entire lives inside a small, shallow tide pool on the edge of a massive continent. Over generations, these creatures study the ebb and flow of their tiny pool. They map the exact temperature of the water, they catalog every single grain of sand, and they write flawless, mathematically perfect equations to describe the localized ripples created by the wind. They proudly declare that they have discovered the absolute, unified laws of water. They believe they have completely mapped the universe. But then, a massive, rogue wave crashes over the barrier of their tide pool, bringing with it terrifying, alien creatures from the deep ocean and completely annihilating their perfectly measured environment. They suddenly realize that their flawless equations only applied to a microscopic, isolated puddle. They are completely blind to the crushing depths, the massive thermal currents, and the terrifying, sprawling ecosystem of the Pacific Ocean that has been raging in the dark just beyond their sight. Humanity is that tide pool. The standard model of particle physics is the mathematical rulebook of the puddle. We spent billions of dollars and thousands of lifetimes meticulously mapping the 5% of the universe that glows, completely convinced that our localized rules govern the infinite depths. But the anomaly at CERN is the rogue wave crashing over the dimensional barrier, proving that we have been completely oblivious to the massive, pitch-black ocean that surrounds us. We are being violently thrown back to square one. The physics textbooks that dictate our understanding of reality must be completely rewritten, not just amended, but burned and reconstructed from the ashes. We must discard the comforting illusion of our mathematical perfection and begin the terrifying task of mapping an alien, invisible universe that actively resists our understanding. This return to square one is accompanied by a dark, suffocating sense of existential dread. If the true operating system of the cosmos is entirely dictated by the dark machinery of the 95% shadow, and if our localized physics is merely a superficial byproduct of that alien infrastructure, we are forced to ask a horrifying question. Are our biological human brains even fundamentally capable of understanding the dark sector? We evolved in the shallow, physical tide pool, our neurons heavily wired to process localized, baryonic matter and standard electromagnetic light. We are attempting to use the crude, biological tools of the 5% minority to reverse engineer the invisible, alien architecture of the 95% majority. The academic panic is not just the fear of being wrong. It is the deeply unsettling, quiet terror that the universe is not just stranger than we imagine, but infinitely stranger than we are physically capable of imagining. We are standing completely naked on the edge of a pitch-black, fathomless ocean, realizing that the comforting light of human science has just been permanently extinguished, and we are forced to step blindly into a cosmos that is vaster, darker, and infinitely more hostile to human logic than we ever dared to fear. While the academic world cowers in the shadow of a shattered standard model, paralyzed by the existential dread of a universe they no longer comprehend, a completely different reaction is quietly taking shape behind the classified, blast-proof doors of the global military-industrial complex. For the theoretical physicist, the discovery of the dark sector and a fifth fundamental force is a catastrophic intellectual defeat. But for the military strategist, the intelligence director, and the weapons developer, it is the exact opposite. It is the sudden, violent opening of the ultimate strategic frontier. Human history is entirely defined by a ruthless, unyielding pattern. Whenever we peel back a layer of reality and discover a new fundamental mechanism of the cosmos, we do not simply observe it with quiet reverence. We immediately, violently weaponize it. We build a cage around the new physics, we harness its raw power, and we turn it into an instrument of absolute global supremacy. To understand the terrifying trajectory of this new discovery, we must look at the brutal, mechanical evolution of modern warfare. Every single leap in military dominance over the last century was directly born from the mastery of a fundamental force. When we finally deciphered the invisible architecture of electromagnetism, we did not just use it to light our cities, we used it to fundamentally conquer the battlefield. We weaponized the radio waves to coordinate global armadas. We built sweeping radar networks to strip away the cover of the horizon, and we engineered the microscopic geometry of our most advanced stealth fighter jets to actively absorb and deflect that exact same electromagnetic spectrum, allowing supersonic bombers to strike with total impunity from the shadows. More recently, we have weaponized light itself, deploying high-energy directed laser weapons to incinerate drones and missiles mid-flight. Electromagnetism became the invisible battleground of the 20th century. Then, we plunged deeper into the subatomic void and unlocked the terrifying secrets of the strong and weak nuclear forces. We looked at the absolute, tyrannical glue holding the atomic nucleus together, and we figured out how to artificially shatter it. The mastery of the strong nuclear force gave us the atomic bomb, a weapon so profoundly destructive that it completely rewrote the geopolitical architecture of the planet, ushering in an era of mutually assured destruction and plunging humanity into the frozen paranoia of the Cold War. We harnessed the microscopic fires of the universe to build weapons capable of erasing entire metropolitan cities in a fraction of a second, and we placed those nuclear reactors inside the heavy steel hulls of deep-sea submarines, allowing them to prowl the crushing depths of the oceans for months at a time. The mastery of a new physical law always, without exception, dictates who rules the earth. Now, we are standing on the precipice of a discovery that makes the splitting of the atom look like child's play. We have not just found a new way to manipulate our own localized 5% reality, we have discovered a fifth force of nature that serves as a bridge to an entirely alien, invisible universe. The geopolitical implications are so staggering that they defy conventional military doctrine. The race to isolate, understand, and eventually manipulate dark sector physics has already begun. The superpowers of the world are looking at the missing transverse energy bleeding out of the Large Hadron Collider, and they are not seeing a mathematical glitch. They are seeing the blueprint for next-generation, reality-breaking technology that completely bypasses the electromagnetic spectrum and renders all current military hardware fundamentally obsolete. Imagine the ultimate, terrifying evolution of stealth technology. Currently, our most advanced, radar-evading aircraft are still entirely bound by the physical laws of our localized universe. They are made of normal matter, they generate thermal heat, and they must physically displace the air as they fly. They are hiding within the electromagnetic spectrum, but they are still physically present. But what happens if a military superpower successfully reverse engineers the dark photon? What happens if they learn how to artificially induce the kinetic mixing we observe at CERN, applying it not just to a single subatomic particle, but to a macroscopic object? We are looking at the theoretical possibility of dark stealth. A vehicle, a drone, or even a heavily armed strategic bomber could be enveloped in a localized field that forces its normal baryonic matter to temporarily translate its energy signature into the dark sector. The aircraft would not simply be evading radar, it would literally, physically drop out of our dimension. It would become entirely invisible to all electromagnetic detection, completely immune to thermal imaging, and utterly silent. Because dark matter does not interact with normal physical barriers, a weaponized platform operating within the dark sector could theoretically fly straight through the solid rock of a mountain range or pass undetected through the heavily reinforced concrete walls of a subterranean command bunker before dropping its payload and vanishing back into the void. This mastery of the dimensional barrier would also revolutionize the concept of armored warfare and defensive shielding. For centuries, military defense has relied on the simple physics of putting a dense, heavy layer of normal matter steel, depleted uranium, or reactive armor between a fragile human target and an incoming kinetic projectile. But if we can harness the fifth force, defense is no longer about stopping a bullet with a thicker piece of metal. It is about altering the physical interaction itself. A defensive shield powered by dark sector physics could theoretically detect the incoming kinetic energy of a hypersonic missile or an artillery shell and instantly, violently siphon that energy out of our dimension, bleeding the lethal force directly into the 95% shadow, exactly as the Large Hadron Collider bleeds missing transverse energy. The incoming projectile would strike the target, but its destructive kinetic energy would simply vanish, absorbed and dissipated by the invisible dark metropolis surrounding us. It would provide absolute, invulnerable shielding, completely rewriting the mechanics of survivability on the battlefield. But the most chilling application of the fifth force lies in its offensive capabilities. If the dark sector can reach across the dimensional divide to steal energy from our world, a weaponized understanding of this physics could allow us to reverse the flow. A military that controls the fifth force would possess the ultimate, unstoppable strategic high ground. They could engineer weaponry that completely ignores the electromagnetic spectrum and the strong nuclear force holding our world together. We are talking about dark weaponry munitions that do not rely on explosive chemical reactions or localized nuclear fission. Instead, these weapons would deliver highly concentrated payloads of dark energy or dark radiation that pass completely harmlessly through all known physical armor, dropping into the localized reality of a target only at the exact moment of detonation. There is no bunker deep enough, no titanium armor thick enough, and no electromagnetic jamming system powerful enough to stop a weapon that physically exists outside the boundaries of normal physics until the microsecond it strikes. This is not science fiction, it is the brutal, inevitable endgame of human curiosity. The very instant a physicist at CERN figures out the exact mathematical frequency required to artificially trigger the creation of a dark photon, that equation will become the most highly classified, desperately guarded military secret in the history of civilization. We are witnessing the silent, invisible dawn of the ultimate global arms race. It is a race not for land, resources, or orbital supremacy, but for the absolute control of the underlying matrix of reality itself. The nation that first unlocks the architecture of the dark sector will not simply win the next war. They will achieve a level of global dominance that borders on omnipotence. They will hold the terrifying power to manipulate the massive, invisible 95% of the cosmos, weaponizing the void to enforce their will upon the fragile, glowing 5%. As the academic world weeps over the death of the Standard Model, the architects of global warfare are actively sharpening their knives in the dark, preparing to turn the greatest scientific discovery in human history into the ultimate, reality-breaking weapon. Humanity has a long, terrifying history of complete blindness to the catastrophic consequences of its own curiosity. We look at the sprawling, subterranean architecture of the Large Hadron Collider as a marvel of modern engineering, a triumphant tool designed to map the cosmos or forge the next generation of absolute global weaponry. We assume that simply because we built the machine, we are completely and fundamentally in control of the forces it unleashes. But there is a deeply ingrained, fatal arrogance in this assumption. We are violently smashing the fundamental building blocks of normal matter together at apocalyptic speeds, generating temperatures that rival the birth of the universe, and desperately trying to pry open a door into the dark sector. Yet, we are completely ignoring the horrifying possibility that the door was closed for a very specific reason. By aggressively poking the unseen 95% of the cosmos, we might not just be inviting a new technological era or a revolution in theoretical physics. We might be actively pulling the trigger on the ultimate existential threat. We are blindly bashing our fists against the dimensional wall, entirely unaware of the extreme, terrifying fragility of the room we are currently standing in. To understand the sheer, universe-ending danger of our subterranean experiments, we must completely discard our macroscopic, biological understanding of nothingness. When you look at the empty space in front of you, or peer through a telescope at the vast, freezing void between the distant stars, your brain perceives a dead, silent vacuum. But in the rigorous, terrifying framework of advanced quantum field theory, empty space simply does not exist. The quantum vacuum is not a dead, empty stage. It is a violently active, boiling ocean of invisible fields overlapping and vibrating in the dark. Every fundamental particle in our physical world, from the electron racing through a wire to the heavy top quark, is merely a localized, temporary ripple in one of these underlying quantum fields. And the most critical, foundational field in our entire localized reality is the Higgs field. It is the invisible, omnipresent web that stretches across the entire span of the cosmos, constantly interacting with fundamental particles to give them their physical mass. Without the Higgs field, electrons would zip away at the speed of light, atoms would instantly dissolve, and the physical universe as we know it would violently cease to exist. But the stability of the Higgs field, and by extension the absolute stability of our entire 5% physical reality, is not a permanent, guaranteed condition. It is a precarious, terrifyingly delicate mathematical balancing act. Physicists measure the stability of these quantum fields through energy states. A field naturally and inevitably wants to rest at its absolute lowest possible energy state, a condition known in physics as the true vacuum. Think of a heavy, solid boulder rolling down the side of a massive, sprawling mountain. The boulder will naturally keep rolling, pulled by gravity, until it reaches the absolute bottom of the valley, where it can rest permanently with zero potential energy. However, the terrifying mathematical data derived from the precise mass of the Higgs boson and the top quark strongly suggests that our universe did not reach the bottom of the mountain. Instead, the heavy boulder of our reality is currently resting in a shallow, localized divot halfway down the slope. We are existing in what theoretical physicists call a false vacuum. This false vacuum is stable enough for now. It has miraculously allowed the universe to exist for 14 billion years. It has allowed stars to ignite with nuclear fusion, sprawling galaxies to take shape in the dark, and complex biological life to eventually crawl out of the primordial oceans to build telescopes and massive particle accelerators. But it is a localized, highly deceptive illusion of safety. The shallow divot on the side of the mountain is the only thing protecting us from the massive, catastrophic drop into the true vacuum below. The only thing keeping the fabric of our physical reality intact is a microscopic, fragile barrier of quantum energy. As long as the universe is left undisturbed, the boulder sits quietly in its shallow resting place. But the universe is no longer undisturbed. Deep underground in Geneva, we are generating the most violent, concentrated, and chaotic bursts of energy the cosmos has seen since the exact fraction of a second following the Big Bang. We are aggressively, deliberately, and repeatedly shaking the mountain. This is exactly where the terrifying discovery of the dark sector elevates the threat from a philosophical nightmare to an active physical countdown. We now definitively know that the massive, unseen 95% of the universe is not a dead, inert shadow. It is a highly active, volatile ecosystem governed by an entirely alien fifth fundamental force. The anomalies bleeding out of CERN, the missing transverse energy, and the sudden creation of dark photons all actively prove that our apocalyptic subatomic collisions are successfully breaching the dimensional barrier. We are forcing a violent, artificial interaction between our fragile, 5% false vacuum and the massive, unknown thermodynamic pressures of the dark sector. We are injecting raw, localized kinetic energy directly into an alien environment, and we have absolutely no mathematical model to predict how the heavy, complex machinery of the dark universe reacts to this violent intrusion. If we continue to aggressively escalate the power of our particle accelerators, blindly trying to map the dark sector or harness its bizarre physics for advanced stealth weaponry, we risk creating a localized energy event so profoundly violent that it acts as a cosmic catalyst. We could accidentally generate a concentrated subatomic spark that punches a microscopic hole directly through the quantum barrier holding our false vacuum together. If that happens, the heavy boulder of our reality will be violently knocked out of its shallow divot. It will immediately begin to plummet down the side of the mountain toward the true vacuum. This is the ultimate, inescapable doomsday scenario. It is a catastrophic, irreversible event known as quantum vacuum decay, and it represents the absolute permanent deletion of the physical universe. If our violent, arrogant interference with the dark sector triggers this phase transition, it will not happen slowly. The exact microsecond the Higgs field drops into the true vacuum, a microscopic bubble of pure, absolute destruction will materialize inside the collision chamber of the Large Hadron Collider. Inside this expanding bubble, the laws of physics are not just altered or warped, they are entirely, irrevocably rewritten. The fundamental forces that hold our world together, electromagnetism, the strong nuclear force, the weak nuclear force, will violently shift or completely cease to exist. The mass of the electron will instantly change. The protons in the nuclei of every atom will instantly fly apart, and the very mathematical code of reality will be erased and replaced by a chaotic, alien framework. Chemistry, biology, and the physical structure of matter will be instantly rendered impossible. Once this bubble of true vacuum is born, It cannot be contained by magnetic fields, it cannot be stopped by physical barriers, and it cannot be reversed by any power in the cosmos. It will expand outward in all directions at the exact, absolute speed of light. Because the boundary of the bubble is expanding at the cosmic speed limit, you would never see it coming. There would be no warning klaxons, no terrifying news reports, and no time for the human mind to comprehend the end of the world. The expanding wall of the phase transition would silently, instantly swallow the subterranean laboratory, the European continent, and the entire Earth in a fraction of a second. It would race outward across the solar system, instantly vaporizing the sun and sweeping across the Milky Way, expanding forever into the deep, freezing void. Everything it touches, every burning star, every orbiting planet, and every single trace of human history would be instantly annihilated and converted into pure, chaotic energy as the universe violently and flawlessly resets itself to the lower energy state. The sheer, blinding terror of vacuum decay lies in its absolute finality. It is not a conventional war, a biological plague, or the slow, inevitable cosmic freeze of entropy over trillions of years. It is the immediate, non-negotiable end of the biological hallucination we call existence, brought upon by our own insatiable desire to touch the unseen. By forcefully opening a door to the dark sector and demanding an interaction between our fragile, isolated reality and the massive, volatile shadows, we are essentially playing Russian roulette with a weapon pointed directly at the head of the cosmos. The missing transverse energy bleeding out of our detectors is a warning. It is the terrifying sound of the ice violently cracking beneath our feet. We believe we are the untouchable masters of our physical domain, boldly pushing the boundaries of human knowledge and military dominance. But we are completely blind to the fact that we are striking matches in a dark, sealed room filled with explosive gas. We are violently poking a massive, unseen monster, completely oblivious to the horrifying reality that if the monster flinches, the fragile, localized bubble of our 5% universe will violently burst, leaving absolutely nothing behind but the cold, silent, and eternal perfection of the true vacuum. As we power down the colossal, supercooled electromagnets and step away from the apocalyptic, subatomic collisions buried deep beneath the concrete bunkers of Geneva, we are forced to re-enter a world that looks exactly the same, yet feels fundamentally and terrifyingly different. You look at your hands, the solid walls of your room, the heavy ground beneath your feet, and the comforting, glowing lights of the city outside your window. For your entire life, your biological hardware has desperately and successfully convinced you that this localized, glowing fraction of reality is the absolute totality of existence. We are evolutionary hardwired to believe in the absolute supremacy of what we can touch, see, and measure. It is a highly effective, deeply necessary psychological survival mechanism, designed by nature to keep our fragile, primitive minds from completely buckling under the crushing, unfathomable scale of the true cosmos. We walk through our daily lives with the absolute, unshakable confidence that the physical matter we interact with is the foundation of reality, and that the empty space between objects is nothing more than a silent, dead void. But the impossible data actively bleeding out of the Large Hadron Collider has violently and permanently stripped away that psychological armor. The missing transverse energy, the glitching subatomic decays, the phantom signature of the heavy dark photon, and the terrifying specter of an alien fifth fundamental force all point to a singular, reality-breaking truth. We have been living a spectacular, deeply arrogant, and incredibly localized delusion. The entire history of human civilization and scientific progress is, at its core, a history of profound, agonizing demotions. Centuries ago, we looked up at the sky and firmly believed the Earth was the fixed, unmoving center of the universe, with the sun, the moon, and the stars revolving exclusively for our divine benefit. Science violently corrected that illusion, forcing us to accept that we are merely a rocky speck orbiting a highly average star. Decades later, we believed our Milky Way was the entire universe, only to have our telescopes reveal that we are just one tiny, insignificant spiral in a violently expanding void populated by trillions of other galaxies. But the discovery of the dark sector is the ultimate, final, and most devastating demotion humanity will ever endure. It completely annihilates the arrogance of normal matter. It proves, with cold, unforgiving mathematical certainty, that we are not the main characters of the cosmic narrative. The entire sprawling architecture of our physical reality, every human triumph, every global war, every burning star, every supermassive black hole, and every single galaxy we have ever meticulously mapped is nothing more than a microscopic 5% minority. We are a rare, bizarre, and nearly statistically insignificant glitch of glowing energy, hopelessly embedded within a massive, complex, and entirely invisible dark empire that actually dictates the true gravitational and structural flow of the universe. We are living our entire lives on the superficial, microscopic skin of reality, completely oblivious to the deep, heavy, and unimaginably active machinery grinding away in the pitch-black shadows just beyond our sight. The true, paralyzing horror of this mirror realm is not that it exists as some abstract astrophysics problem happening billions of light-years away in the freezing reaches of deep space. The terror lies in its absolute, claustrophobic proximity. The dark sector does not exist out there. It exists right here. Because dark matter is completely and violently immune to the electromagnetic force that gives our localized world its physical solidity, the dimensional wall separating our two realities is entirely porous. The two universes share the exact same three-dimensional spatial coordinates. At this very microsecond, the Earth is hurtling at hundreds of thousands of miles per hour through a dense, highly structured, and violently active invisible metropolis. There are unseen forces, heavy dark molecules, complex dark chemistry, and perhaps even the massive, crushing remnants of dark stars actively passing through our solar system, completely unimpeded by the blazing plasma of our sun or the solid iron core of our planet. The physical space you are occupying right now is not yours alone. It is heavily, densely populated by an alien ecosystem that operates by an entirely different, terrifying rulebook, completely and utterly indifferent to your biological existence. When we were young children, our deepest, most primal evolutionary instincts taught us to fear the dark. We stared into the unlit corners of our bedrooms and imagined terrifying, unseen monsters hiding under the bed or lurking in the pitch-black shadows of the closet. As we grew older, our rational, educated, and scientifically grounded minds dismissed these fears as foolish, childish hallucinations. We turned on the lights, looked at the seemingly empty space, and proudly declared that there was absolutely nothing there. We built a civilization on the comforting belief that if our advanced instruments could not see it or measure it, it simply did not exist. But the anomalies at CERN have forcefully and brutally reminded us that our eyes, our instruments, and our entire standard model are completely blind to 95% of reality. The monsters in the dark are not childhood fantasies. They are a mathematical, astrophysical certainty. They are not hiding under your bed waiting to strike. They are the dense, heavy structures of dark chemistry, the alien particles, and the massive webs of dark matter passing right through your skull, slicing silently through your beating heart, and continuing their unbroken trajectory through the molten core of the Earth without slowing down for a fraction of a millisecond. We are fragile, glowing ghosts wandering blindly through a crowded, deafening, and violently active, invisible highway, completely unaware of the monstrous, heavy traffic rushing right through our bones. Yet within the suffocating grip of this profound existential dread, there is a strange, dark, and undeniable beauty to be found. To finally realize that the universe is infinitely larger, stranger, and more complex than our localized, superficial physics could ever possibly describe, is not just a terrifying demotion, it is an incredible, awe-inspiring awakening. We have finally cracked the shell of our 5% prison. By pushing the Large Hadron Collider to the absolute limits of physical violence, we have caught the very first, fleeting whisper from the massive shadow that surrounds us. We are standing on the precipice of an entirely new era of human understanding, an era where the old, comforting textbooks are permanently burned, the fragile illusions of our safety are discarded, and the true, terrifying scale of reality is finally laid bare. We may not be the main characters of existence, and we may be hopelessly, overwhelmingly outnumbered by an invisible universe that we can barely comprehend, but we are the first glowing anomalies in the history of the cosmos to actually figure it out. We have built machines capable of shaking the dimensional wall. We have identified the heavy footprint of the fifth force, and we have forced the dark to temporarily reveal its hand. Now, as you sit in the quiet isolation of your room and look at the seemingly empty space surrounding you, I want you to feel the massive, undeniable weight of the 95% shadow currently sharing your exact physical coordinates. I want you to look at the dark corners of your environment, not with the irrational fear of a child, but with the chilling, educated understanding of a universe that is vastly more populated than you ever thought possible. Does the undeniable, mathematical reality of a massive, invisible universe constantly passing through your physical body terrify you, plunging you into an existential panic about your own insignificance? Or do you see this shattering of the standard model as the ultimate scientific awakening, a thrilling, dangerous invitation to finally understand the true, hidden architecture of the cosmos? Leave your thoughts, your theories, and your deepest existential dread in the comments below. We are only just beginning to scratch the surface of the grand illusions that bind us to this world, and I promise you, the deeper we probe into the void, the darker the truth becomes. Thank you for joining me on this journey into the abyss of the dark sector. Be careful where you look, because the void is finally looking back. Good night, and I will see you in the next video here at Still Science Lab.